Season 5, Episode 16 of Brackets, Bubbles, and Midfield. I'm Jonathan Lidskin. To my right, even though I'm pointing left, is Sam Fetterman. Below me, Josh Link at the Zagaholic on Twitter. We are here tonight to talk some Zags. This is one of the many previews we have done so far for individual teams. This is one of many previews that we are continuing to do leading up to our conference previews in October. Josh, how are you?
I'm well. How are you all doing tonight?
I am great. Sam?
Doing great. Some late night talk. Just West Coast got to get me back in the action.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Gotta get ready and get the bodies on schedule for those late college basketball games on the West Coast.
I cannot wait for San Francisco versus Cal Poly on Tuesday, November 5th.
It's going to be epic.
On election night. That is right. So let's get right into it. Gonzaga last year has by their standards, very bad start to the season. There were even some questions at one point about whether they would make the NCAA tournament, but they completely flipped it in the second half of the year. They grabbed a 5 seed, beat McNeese in the first round, followed by a blowout win over Kansas before Purdue beat them in the Sweet 16. But this Gonzaga team is a different but very similar look in many aspects. They bring back a lot of returners. Steel Venters has not yet played a game for them, and so I think that's where I want to start, because you had a player who was probably going to start, or at the very least be a very key player for them last year, go down with a season-ending injury about a month before the season. So, Josh, what should we expect this year out of Steel Venters now that he's back from injury?
Yeah, so Steele is a really great shooter, obviously. He brings with him, though, a much more refined offensive game than just spot-up shooter. He can score from all 3 levels. He was a Big Sky Player of the Year, incoming from Eastern Washington last year before he hurt his knee. But ultimately what he brings is just versatility on the wing. It's something that we lacked last year because, obviously losing him right before the season began was quite the blow for the roster. But, I think having him, as well as like Caleb Battle and Michael Ajayi in the mix, kind of to like plug and play between that 2 through 4 range, is going to provide a lot more depth this year that we were sorely missing last year.
I look at Steel Venters, and yes, he played in that terrific offensive system that David Riley ran at Eastern Washington. And the thing that Gonzaga really lacked last year was depth. And Steel Venters isn't a depth piece, but Steel Venters makes Dusty Stromer a depth piece. Dusty Stromer had to play 60% of the minutes last year. That's 60% of the minutes that he was not ready for. He was solid in WCC play, but he was really not good against top level competition. And putting Stromer, now a sophomore, with another year of development and strength building under his belt, giving him a reduced role, having Steel Venters move up and play 25, 27 minutes a game, I think it makes Gonzaga so much better.
Yeah, I agree completely. I think one thing that Dusty does well, something that's maybe understated or not known in the general public, is that he's an excellent defender. He's much better defender than we anticipated with him coming in as a freshman. Whereas Steele is maybe more of an average defender at his position. So that's something that I think Dusty can bring off the bench, in his spot minutes this year. Obviously, like you said, it's going to be a reduced role, but, it'd be a great opportunity for him to learn a lot this season behind Caleb Battle, behind Nolan Hickman, behind Steel Venters.
Yeah, so we could sort of dive into this wing depth here since we started with Steel Venters. We mentioned the name Michael Ajayi, who came in from Pepperdine. The team itself, Pepperdine, was not very good. They finished 224th in KenPom. However, new coach coming in for them this year, and that is probably a good decision given the fact that they had 3 players on their roster, Ajayi included, that at least got high major offers and when they entered the portal. You have Javon Porter, who ended up at Loyola Marymount, and Houston Millett, who was one of the first players that committed in the portal. He went to Alabama. And then Gonzaga snags Ajayi, who was a 17-point, 10 rebound a game efficient scorer last year. Josh, what can you tell us about Michael Ajayi? What does he add to the Zags that maybe they didn't have last year?
Well, for one, he adds legitimate NBA talent to the roster. This is a guy that got looks in NBA workouts this offseason. He is mentored by Isaiah Thomas, former University of Washington Husky, and Jamal Crawford. Obviously, everybody knows who Jamal Crawford is. He started out at the JUCO level and was kind of a late riser, in the late part of his high school career and then through his JUCO career. But he's been growing his game at every step of the way. He is an absolute bucket. He can score with the best of them, and he's also an exceptional rebounder at his position as well. I actually think that, and I think a lot of Zag insiders think that Ajayi will probably be our starting four. Because Ben Gregg brings so much off the bench with that spot energy that Ajayi is just going to flourish in that starting four position, and also bring a lot of athleticism and flexibility at that four spot next to Graham Ike.
I completely agree with this. If there was one thing that I thought last year's Gonzaga team didn't really have a ton of, it was outside of Anton Watson. I didn't think they had a lot of size that really was athletic and moved well on the perimeter and on the inside. And Ajayi gives you maybe not as much refined defense as Anton Watson, but he'll give you a better production offensively, better on the ball, and he can rebound really well. He's just a very talented and very athletic offensive player that can really impact the game defensively with his movement skills. And really, it's a good frame. It's 6'7", it's 225. That's an NBA frame.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you mentioned, he can slide out to the perimeter. He shot over 40% last year at Pepperdine, which, for his size, position isn't necessarily a common thing at this level. I wouldn't call him a dead eye shooter. He has like his spots that are the right spots for him to be taking shots from. And that's something that I believe that a lot of NBA teams want him to continue to improve upon. But he does have the ability to step out and knock down a three from time to time. But, obviously losing Anton Watson is a massive loss, no matter which way you paint it, no matter which player you bring in to replace him. One of the best defensive players in all of college basketball, a Swiss Army knife, really at that four spot for Gonzaga for multiple years. And really the heart and soul of what the team was, really, from Spokane, lived there for 9 years. We can't replace that. But Michael Ajayi is an exceptional player, and one of the most exciting players, in my opinion, in the entire portal. Somebody who I keyed in on right away. Like, I want Ajayi, to come to Gonzaga. Obviously, being from Washington State, it's a nice hometown fit.
So sticking with sort of the transfer and I guess like guys that didn't play for Gonzaga last year theme, I want to go over to Khalif Battle for a sec, because while I don't think Khalif Battle is expected to be the player, at least going into the season, that he was at Arkansas last year, coming off of his career at Temple, I do think that getting Khalif Battle was really, really important, because he is a guy that even at 6'5" can handle the ball. And even in just a small sample size, if you look at it, Ryan Nembhard was playing literally every single minute at point last year. That like Gonzaga had nobody else at the end of the year that could handle the ball except for Ryan Nembhard. So, Josh, am I spot on here that Khalif Battle was and pretty much adding another guy who can handle the ball was really, really important for this team?
Yeah, I think what Khalif brings to the table that a lot of people may not recognize is that he's very flexible. He can play really 1 through 3. He's much bigger than most people realize. He kind of looks slight of frame when you watch him on TV, but he's 6'5", and he is and I'm not exaggerating here when I say that he may be one of the top 5 bucket getters in all of college basketball. Like in any moment, he can drop 30 points on you. Matter of fact, I believe over the last 7 games of last season for Arkansas, he averaged almost 30 points a game for them. And this is a guy who does something at his position that is kind of rare. He gets to the line at an exceptional rate. We're talking like top 5, top 10 in the nation among all players, let alone a guard. This is something that usually you talk about guys like Drew Timme or, bigs who can just get to the line, every opportunity. But Caleb gets there almost as often and maybe more often than most of the bigs in the country. And so he likes to attack the bucket. He likes to get in the face of defenders. And he brings something that Nolan Hickman and Ryan Nembhard do not bring at all, which is, just really the ability to get that bucket at the end of the game, something Gonzaga's not really had the last couple of years.
Yeah, I think the thing with Battle is really just being consistent in whatever role that they need him to be. Like, Arkansas was a forgettable team last year because of how bad they were, but I obviously, being at an SEC school, still followed them and followed the league. One thing that people might forget about Khalif Battle is he had a stretch last year where he played 4 straight games, 15 minutes or less. He then played 34 against Mississippi State and 35 against Texas A&M. Didn't really shoot it well in that Texas A&M game. But then after the A&M game, he has a 4-game stretch where he scores 42 against Mizzou, 36 against Vanderbilt, 34 against Kentucky, and 29 against LSU. When that guy is on, he is one of the best scorers in college basketball. With him, it's just about being consistent.
Yeah. I also want to just add to that, he had the opportunity to go somewhere like Kansas State where he could be the guy, somebody who's going to be your primary scorer, primary starter at a guard spot. He chose to come to Gonzaga after spending really the rest of his career at 4 different schools and has now decided to come and play a lesser role, kind of like a 6-man de facto. He might start a few games. He's going to play different spots, different roles. He wants to win in his final season in college basketball. And that is an exceptional trait that I think that a lot of people overlooked during his recruitment. That's something that maybe surprised some people who thought he was just looking for, the spotlight at his next stop.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sam, do you have anything to add on Battle?
I don't really have a ton to add on Battle, but that Arkansas team was a total train wreck, and Battle was really one of the only watchable things towards the end of the season. And I just look at the fact that Gonzaga struggled against the best teams on their schedule last year, the ones that were able to really put pressure on the ball. And towards the end of the season, obviously, McNeese over-trapped and got blown out. Kansas was gassed throughout the entire stretch. And then they lost the second time to Purdue the exact same way they lost the first time. And Ryan Nembhard played 98% of the minutes in the last 5 games of the season. Ryan Nembhard basically could not come off the floor. Now he can come off the floor.
Yeah.
Now, not that you want Ryan Nembhard to come off the floor all that much. He was exceptional in the second half of the season last year after really struggling to get started at Gonzaga. He figured it out when WCC play came around. And I remember having this debate with you, Josh, a couple of times last year that I was never fully sold on Gonzaga last year. And I still don't believe that I was fully sold on Gonzaga last year. I mean, as I mentioned, the NCAA tournament games, Kansas was just about cooked. They were checked out. Not to diminish making a Sweet 16 because it's always very impressive, but I still don't think that Gonzaga team was anywhere near the level that a Gonzaga team we've come to expect. And I think this year's Gonzaga team has all of the pieces to get back to a Gonzaga team that we will expect to see. Nolan Hickman is back for a 4th year, and we haven't even mentioned him yet, and he averaged 14 points a game last year.
Yeah. Yeah, and improved his 3-point shooting to 41%, which was something that a lot of people didn't think he would be capable of doing. And like you mentioned, now you can play Nolan at the point. Nolan Hickman is a natural point guard. That's what he really grew up doing, and what he was tasked to do early on in his career at Gonzaga. He was forced to kind of play a bigger role during his sophomore year than maybe he should have played, because we just didn't really have another point guard on the roster to play. But this past season, obviously Ryan Nembhard became the de facto starting point guard, but now Nolan can actually play those combo guard minutes. He can do a little bit more because Caleb's there, because we still have Dusty on the roster, because Steele's back. These are versatility problems that we had last year that this year, on paper, I think Sleepers media was talking about how there's still only 3 guards on the roster. That's not entirely true, because every single player is just super versatile and can play 2 or 3 different positions. It's not your prototypical backcourt. It's really kind of fluid how everything's going to work together. And I think that just speaks volumes for what the coaching staff was looking to do during the offseason. They're shoring up really every single spot they could to make a potential Final Four run this year.
Yeah, and I think that even if maybe a guard gets hurt and they don't really have the depth that they want, you're telling me last year they had probably the worst case scenario with their guard depth and they were a 5 seed. If that's going to be their floor, I'm perfectly fine going out and saying that this is one of the best teams in college basketball headed into the season.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've heard a lot of Gonzaga fans maybe have slightly bigger expectations than what the national pundits have said so far. Stuff like, Final Four or bust, national title or bust, whatever. I don't really buy into that yet, but I think that this team has all of the pieces you need to potentially do that. And I think that we're better than what some of the folks have ranked us so far, like in that 8 to 12 range, or maybe more like probably top 5 in the nation heading in. Whether that's going to coalesce into a trip to the Final Four remains to be seen. Obviously, a lot of luck has to play into March for that to happen. But just on the Nolan Hickman front, real quick. We talked about his improvement at the 3-point, his 3-point shooting. His offensive rating also has gone up year over year from 105 as a freshman to 108 as a sophomore to 119.9 last year as a junior, top 200 in the nation. And I don't see how it's possible with as many pieces that are complementing him in that backcourt now that doesn't, breach 120 and him be in the discussion for one of the better improving players in the nation this season.
And we haven't even discussed the guy that all Gonzaga fans were talking about as who should have been the conference player of the year, in Graham Ike, who averaged 17 and 7 last year, coming off of an injury at Wyoming in his final year there, where he wasn't even able to play a minute. So comes back, dominates in the low post. And I think this Gonzaga team is a lot better suited to playing with him because they don't have, because they have more guys that can stand on the perimeter, handle the ball, and shoot. So it gives Ike more space to work down low. I think that maybe not a shoe-in for WCC Player of the Year because there's a lot of talented guys in the league, but I would not be surprised if this year he does take home the award.
Yeah, I think he should have had it obviously last year. It was kind of
Bobo.
I don't want to say that that the voters in the WCC were anti-Gonzaga, but there was definitely some concerted effort to award St. Mary's players because they won the conference. But Graham Ike was dominant really for the last third of last season, and it really did take him a while to kind of get back to form. This is a guy who came off of a significant foot injury and kind of re-aggravated it a little bit in the summer heading back into play last year with Gonzaga. He was in a boot, I believe, all the way until about a week before the first game of the year. And if you watch really the first 5 games of last season, even going into the exhibition games and all that, he he was hobbling kind of up the court. At times I wondered, was this guy going to even be able to finish the season? But, as his conditioning stepped into play, as he became more and more comfortable with his, confident in his foot and his body again, you could tell like there was a switch that flipped at a certain point, and he was absolutely dominant to close out the season. I honestly think, and obviously I have Zeg colored glasses on, but I think that Graham Ike is a potential All-American type player for Gonzaga. I don't know about National Player of the Year. Obviously, that there's a lot of stuff that goes into that. It's a lot more than just simply statistics and all that. But he's going to be a dominant big in the same mold of like how Drew Timme was for Gonzaga. How some of the best bigs that have played Domas Sabonis, you name it, throughout the years for Gonzaga.
I'm not sure how many back-to-basket centers are better than Graham Ike in college basketball right now. I mean, he's a tier above, like he's a tier or two above, like the Vlad Goldens of the world. He's obviously not quite as good defensively as a Ryan Kalkbrenner, but I think he's more skilled offensively. Just trying to think who else is. I mean, Broom is better. Dickinson probably better with his back to the basket.
I honestly think Hunter Dickinson's the one of the few guys who I would put on that list as being all around probably a peg, maybe a slight peg above him on paper. But yeah, it's really hard to come up with a list of guys who are in the same stratosphere as Graham Ike. And like you mentioned, and like you mentioned, he is maybe not the exceptional defender that Ryan Kalkbrenner is, but he's a solid defender. He's better than Drew Timme was, and I love Drew Timme, and that's no knock on him. He'll be the first to tell you he's not one of the best defenders in the world, but and he's not a rim protector, but what he does is he gets in there and he gives people headaches at times. He was really great. I don't know how much of that Kentucky Gonzaga game you all watched, but he was amazing in that game. And dominant, really. Like Kentucky fans told me for weeks after that how upset they were at how well Ike played against them. So I think Ike is, like I said, a potential All-American type player, maybe even challenging or getting votes in that National Player of the Year conversation.
If you'll allow me to get my daily John Calipari shot in there. Kentucky's interior defense didn't provide much of a resistance either last year, though.
They did not.
Aside from those 5 minutes where Big Z was the greatest player of all time, not much.
Yeah. If you go back and look at the great Stephen Carr, he's one of the Zeg Twitter's great producers of content over the years. He has a video thread out there where he talked about how Mark Few basically spammed the pick and roll from Nembhard to Ike for that last, I don't know how many possessions of that game. Like he went to the well over and over and over again.
The first time you came on the podcast at the beginning of last season, you talked about how impressed you were with Braden Huff after he redshirted. Obviously, didn't see as much playing time throughout the course of the season. Wasn't quite ready for it. Do you think he's going to be ready for it this year?
I don't think he's going to get as many minutes as he even got last year. And that's not a knock on Braden. I think Braden brings with him one of the better offensive toolkits in the nation for his size, his age, all that. But defensively, he's a liability still. And ultimately, when you have guys like Graham Ike, Michael Ajayi, and Ben Gregg, who are going to be the big three front court players for Gonzaga, it's going to just be super hard for him to find those minutes. I think he will find some minutes in WCC play and obviously some of the lesser games in the non-conference schedule. But yeah, we're talking like maybe 8 to 12 minutes a game for him this year. It's not going to be a significant role.
Yeah, I just going back to Ike real quick before we really dive in on Greg, and obviously we just mentioned Huff. It should scare other teams that Gonzaga could theoretically go 9 deep and their best player is the only one on the team who won't shoot like 35% from three or around there, because everyone else in that rotation can. Not saying all of them will. Nembhard was like a 32% 3-point shooter last year, but he shot 35% his second season at Creighton, so he physically can do it. But yeah, to talk about Ben Gregg, like this was a guy who kind of stepped into a bigger role last year, came in, hit 39 threes, was really efficient from two, shot 73% from 2-point range. I know he's maybe not going to start, and you said he might come off the bench in kind of that energizer role, but I guess my question about Greg is like, is there a next step for him, or is what he did last year like perfectly okay for this team?
I think what he did last year is the prototype for what you want from Ben Gregg. He is a monster, and I am not kidding when I say monster when he comes in off the bench. I don't think a lot of teams have a second front line with a guy like him. There's very few teams in the nation that have that kind of luxury. And we're talking about a guy who had an offensive rating last year of 133.7, top 10 in the nation. He played some starter role really for that second half of the season after Dusty kind of moved back to the bench, and that kind of freed up some flexibility for the Zags in the backcourt that they didn't have because early on when Dusty was playing a much bigger role. But Ben this year is just simply going to slide back into that de facto 6-man, really like 6 starter, if you will, by minutes played role. And that's the thing about it. It's like, do you care about the fact that you're a starter, or do you care about playing a significant role on a potential Final Four team? And I think Ben Gregg gets it. He understands exactly what it takes to be a winner, and that's what makes him invaluable for Gonzaga off that bench.
One of the things that I like about Ben Gregg so much is I mentioned he hit 39 threes last year. He shot around 38%. But one of the things I like about Ben Gregg is that his ability to step out and hit 40 threes in a season allows him and Graham Ike to play together and makes Gonzaga's rim protection that much better.
Yeah, it stretches the floor, gives you versatility that you maybe don't have with some of the other looks that other teams can run. And great, like you said, great 3-point shooter for his size. Also, though, he shot 73% inside the arc, top 5 in the nation. So when he does slide in to the post, he's automatic.
Gonzaga's non-conference schedule doesn't look like it's fully out yet. So there's a bunch of really difficult games on there, like there always are. San Diego State at the beginning of the season, we have no idea what they're going to be, but they'll always fight you. Second time today, I've said exactly those words.
Yeah.
Kentucky's in there again, not exactly sure what they're going to look like. UConn at the Garden, that's going to be one of the best games of college basketball all season. Not exactly sure what UCLA is going to look like, but they're on there. Not exactly sure what Arizona State's going to look like. And then you have Atlantis.
Yeah, battle for Atlantis in the Bahamas. Arizona, Louisville, Indiana. Those are probably Oklahoma, probably the better teams in that tournament.
You're probably getting two quality games there.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there's the Baylor game, which was just recently kind of rumored on the Ion College Basketball podcast with Matt Norlander. But that's probably going to be a season tip-off game, first day of the season in Las Vegas. That's what I've kind of been hearing right now. We're talking top 10 first game matchup. Yeah.
I think it was just they didn't do an episode for like a couple weeks, and I stopped listening. But I got to get back to it.
Yeah, absolutely. They've dropped some nuggets over the last couple of weeks for Gonzaga, but like you mentioned, the battle for Atlantis, couple quality games. That Kentucky game is it could be a fringe top 25 game. We'll see kind of how Kentucky plays out as the early season progresses. And then UConn, is UConn a national title contender this year? Maybe not quite in the same vein that they were the last couple of seasons, but that game in particular for us has a special meaning. Number one, we'd love to get the Bugaboo offer back and beat UConn finally after losing to them, twice in the last 2 years. But then also Aiden Mahaney transferred there from St. Mary's, and Aiden is probably one of the most hated players in Gonzaga history. So we are looking forward to that game very much.
I still remember the game that made America fall in love with Aiden Mahaney. One of my favorite late night watches over the last few years of college basketball was that Gonzaga St. Mary's game. But also this year, 2 new members of the WCC in Oregon State and Washington State. What is the relationship between Gonzaga and Washington State? Like, it's a rivalry, but like, how much of a rivalry would you really say it is? Because the programs are on such different footing. They've never really been in the same league, but now they are.
Historically speaking, it's a pretty good rivalry, to be honest. During the Tony Bennett era and Ken Bone era, it was back and forth. We're talking like the years of like Klay Thompson and some of those guys. And then, we stopped the series, the mid 2010s. But before that, long before that, in the 90s, Kelvin Sampson, when he was the coach at Washington State, he stopped the series also. So like there's a little bad blood there. There's a little, their fans do not like us, and we don't really care that much for Washington State. I think it's going to be a lot of fun to renew that series, especially considering UW fell off our schedule this year because Danny Sprinkle ran from the grind, so to speak. I think it's going to be really exciting to renew that whatever hour and a half drive between Spokane and Pullman, that a lot of fans have made over the years.
Is that also more of like we both hate UW more than we hate each other, but we still hate each other?
Yeah, absolutely. UW is definitely enemy number one in Washington State for both programs, but Washington State and Gonzaga, still a lot of really fun rivalry games over the years.
So before we close this out, I'm gonna do my I guess like semi-annual, because I really will say it whenever the WCC comes up. The WCC is one of the most underrated conferences in the country, and I don't expect like casual college basketball fans to realize that, but Josh, you can speak about it just as well as anyone. And not only do you have Gonzaga and St. Mary's in the conference, but you've got San Francisco and Santa Clara, which have both established themselves as like really solid, like consistent top 100 KenPom programs. Loyola Marymount this year has some talent to work with. Washington State coming into the league has not only some talent, but David Riley is just an excellent
I saw some
coach.
Oregon State hype on Twitter today. I will not be speaking on it.
And then even at the bottom of the league, I mean, Portland, we've talked about for years how Shante Leggins is a good coach. A lot of the national media guys love him. And then you have Pepperdine and Pacific, who I know were not very good last year, but made really intriguing hires, especially Pacific with Dave Smart.
Yeah, and then don't forget Steve Lavin at San Diego, which is always a fun time.
I would like to forget.
That's fair. You mentioned Santa Clara and San Francisco. Santa Clara and what Herb Sendek has done at that program over the last half decade to 8 years or so has been phenomenal. We're talking multiple first-round NBA draft picks. We're talking multiple runs at Gonzaga and St. Mary's. They've beaten some good teams in the out of conference. They've never quite really put it all together to be able to get to the NCAA tournament, but there's some really intriguing talent on that roster this year, and they have just as good of an opportunity as they have had in recent memory to potentially, find their way into whether it be a good NIT bid or even potentially a sleeper tournament bid if the right chips fall.
If Santa Clara, especially,
go
ahead, Sam.
I'm a huge Herb Sendek proponent, huge fan of what he's built over there. Aside from 2021, where they played a shortened season, they've got 4 straight 20-win seasons. They're top 110 in KenPom the last 3 years. I have them preseason number 84 in my top 100, just released team 84 a couple days ago. So I'm a big fan of Santa Clara, what they brought in this year, and Carlos Stewart coming back, and then everybody else. That is leading scorer Adama Ball, and then third, fourth, fifth, and sixth leading scorers also back. The only key player that's not back is Carlos Marshall, but they bring in Carlos Stewart.
Yeah.
And San Francisco, I'm a huge fan of USF for next year. I have them in my top 75. Duedo Newberry is one of the most underrated players in the country. Jason Rivera Torres is an interesting piece coming in from Vanderbilt. Carlton Lingard is a athletic freak.
I'm a huge Lingard fan. Yeah.
Yeah.
I also think
Marcus Williams, Malik Thomas, and the Beasleys in the backcourt. This is a stacked team. Obviously, there's no Jonathan Mobo, and as I said earlier, I thought he was the best player in the conference last year, and that's a big loss. But I think they'll be just fine. Chris Gerlofson has done a really nice job taking over for Todd Golden, who did a really nice job taking over for Kyle Smith.
Yeah, if Marcus Williams can do what he did against Gonzaga at the end of the season last year in both of our matchups and really kind of just become the guy in that backcourt and be dominant, I think San Francisco has a chance to take that next step up. Chris Gerlofson is a fantastic coach. He carries on a long tradition, obviously, from Todd Golden and Kyle Smith before him. This is a program that has been on the rise for the better part of the last 20 years, and a program that has a storied history, obviously multiple national titles back in the Bill Russell, Casey Jones days, as well as some really dang good teams in the late 70s and 80s with Bill Cartwright and some of those guys. Like, I think San Francisco is, I wouldn't want to call them a sleeping giant, but they are definitely a sleeping program of some level of giants, that could potentially do something in the future. So I agree. The WCC is vastly underrated by the national, the national college basketball fan, and it's something that most people, Gonzaga doesn't play anybody when they get into conference play. But that's just simply not true.
It's not that they don't play anybody; it's that they just do play a couple games against nobody.
Yeah, and it doesn't help that the bottom half of the WCC is generally bad. So, the top half, though, like, really a lot of fun matchups. And, obviously we haven't really even talked about St. Mary's that much tonight, but, they're still going to be St. Mary's. Randy Bennett still has a ton of talent over in Moraga. And, it's going to be a lot of fun this year to see how that rivalry plays out. As well as, like you said, the new coming teams into the WCC for this season, something that's, an injection of at least some more intrigue than we've had in recent memory.
Yeah, I know St. Mary's lost some pretty key players with Mahaney and Jefferson, both the major programs, but like they're pulling in like pretty highly ranked recruits now. So this is not a program that is going away, even if they lose some players to the portal.
Yeah, I don't know how to pronounce his name. The guy they got from Arizona.
It's like Paulius Morauskas, I think.
I would not be shocked if that guy averages 15 to 17 points a game for St. Mary's this year.
And Arizona had a couple
they have the reigning player of the year in the league, and the player of the year might be like the third best player on the team.
Yeah, exactly.
I still don't get how that happened.
It's pretty wild how the WCC Conference Player of the Year award went down. There's some interesting stuff that I could mention off camera with you guys, but I'm not going to put it out there and air dirty laundry to the general public. So we'll keep that one under wraps for now.
All right. You guys got anything else to add before we wrap this up?
I just want to say thank you for having me on. You can find me on Twitter /X, whatever it's called now, at the Zagaholic. I have the Zagaholic podcast with Caldwell, who is one of the recruiting maestros for Gonzaga. And we love talking Zags, and anybody who wants to talk hoops, I'm always down.
Yeah, I try to follow a ton of people who just are really passionate or cover a specific team. Josh is one of the best guys.
I appreciate that.
For his Gonzaga stuff is awesome. So, Sam, you want to take us home?
All right. If you came to hear about Tyler Self and where he's working, you came to the right place. If you came to hear about the WCC Player of the Year, you came to the right place. And if you came to hear about the latest happenings with Caleb Grill, you came to the right place. This is Season 5, Episode 16 of Brackets, Bubbles, and Bid Stealers. Yet another preview. This one obviously covering the Gonzaga Bulldogs. And we'll see you next time.